Good evening, everyone. My name is Colin Schladweiler. I will be running the 1000 Eyes on the Water program tonight for Miami Shores. I'm just going to give a couple more minutes to see if anyone else will be trickling in. Otherwise, we will be starting at 7:05. So get ready. We'll be starting here really shortly. All right. Well, we're going to get started with the program. I know you all probably have busy nights. It's a Thursday. So let's get this thing started. Well, hello, everyone. My name is Colin Schladweiler. I'm the program manager at Miami Waterkeeper. I want to thank the city of Miami Shores for organizing this presentation and this training to be given to some of you who are either residing or have connections to Miami Shores. So tonight I'll be presenting our signature 1000 Eyes on the Water program, which is essentially a water patrol training that showcases all the different pollution issues that is very unique to South Florida and all the different things that you may see in your day-to-day life. And you'll be able to help Miami Waterkeeper out by keeping your eyes on the water because there's 470 miles of waterways in South Florida in Miami-Dade and Broward County, and there's only 7 of us at Miami Waterkeeper. So I'm really excited to welcome you all to the team, and I hope by the end of the training you'll be more fired up and more educated on how you can help Biscayne Bay with its water quality and help it get back on track from our recent pollution issues that we've seen over the last couple of months that I'll dive into. So today I just want to go over the training overview. So I'll start off by talking about 1000 Eyes on the Water, what that is, as well as what Miami Waterkeeper is, who we are, and what our nonprofit stands for, and the connections that we hold, not just here in South Florida, but internationally. And after that, we'll be going into Biscayne Bay habitats. For those of you who maybe are unaware of some of the different habitats that are living and thriving here in Biscayne Bay and are under siege from different pollution issues. And that'll segue right into water pollution and all the different types of water pollution that Miami Waterkeeper fights for. A lot of times people like to think about pollution as the plastic issue that washes up ashore. That's very visual. We can see that. But Miami Waterkeeper likes to focus our efforts on maybe pollution issues that you can't see that have almost immensely stronger impacts to the bay. And at the very end, I'll just go over some water patrol guidelines and how to begin your journey as part of Miami Waterkeeper's water patrol. And I hope that you'll feel amped up and I'll be able to answer any questions you have about what's going on with Biscayne Bay, the pollution issues that are plaguing it, and how we all can get involved to help solve it. So a little bit of a history about Miami Waterkeeper. Back in the 1960s, a group of fishermen banded together on the Hudson River and started noticing that pollution issues coming from the industrial factories were kind of polluting all of their waterways, and fish were coming up dead. It didn't look like a great site and a great habitat for a thriving fishery. So these fishermen banded together and created the Hudson River Folk Association. And essentially, after that, in the 1980s, they coined the name the Hudson River Keeper. And ever since that day, river keepers, bay keepers, water keepers across the world, across 6 continents, there's over 300 different organizations today. And Miami Waterkeeper is your local water keeper that's protecting Biscayne Bay and all of South Florida's watersheds. In the state of Florida, we have 13 water keepers. So if you're listening to this and for some reason you're not in South Florida, definitely check out your local water keeper if you have one, and start finding out different ways that you can get involved locally. So instead of talking about the history of the Waterkeeper Alliance movement, I want to talk about how it reached South Florida in 2010 and kind of why we're here and why it's important. So a big thing that we like to talk about and to introduce people to the water issues that are happening in Biscayne Bay is the historic water flow. So if you see in the map on the left, the Kissimmee River and Lake Okeechobee historically were able to be filtered, all of their fresh water, through the Everglades, which is um, um, densely forested with vegetation, all of these subtropical swamps. And by the time the freshwater reached Biscayne Bay or Florida Bay, all that vegetation in the Everglades and all of the different kinds of forests were able to take up a lot of the pollutants that were coming down from Lake Okeechobee in the Kissimmee River. So all of the freshwater entering Florida Bay and Biscayne Bay was essentially clean. It was more pure. It had less nutrients and less pollutants that were collected along the way and were able to trapped in that vegetation, in that soil, and in that groundwater. However, Miami and South Florida has a very interesting past. When we started building and expanding as a U.S. city in 1896, and then by 1940, we grew from a population of only 300 people to 142,000. And then today we have about 6 million people in the metropolitan area of South Florida. So that came with it all these different kinds of habitat and landscape alterations. We clear cut thick mangrove stands that used to once exist in Miami Beach and along the shores of all the western Miami-Dade County. And we started draining the Everglades. We started taking out vegetation and putting in beaches and started dredging projects. And so what this did essentially with the water flow is that all that fresh water that used to be able to be filtered through the Everglades and through the vegetation now all of a sudden is being diverted in this man-made canal system. And so when you think about canals, and if we think about a little drop of water that starts in Lake Okeechobee and moves westward or eastward or southward towards Biscayne Bay, what's the difference between the historic water flow and the current water flow? Well, when it travels in these canal systems, it doesn't have the opportunity to really interact with vegetation. It doesn't really have that opportunity to interact with the soil and the groundwater. Essentially, all of this fresh water starts in the north, it comes down and pulses and enters Biscayne Bay more polluted, and it didn't have that opportunity to be cleaned and purified. So essentially, we eliminated that constant freshwater flow into Biscayne Bay and is now taken over by the canal system, which puts all of this freshwater in pulses and essentially limits the amount of fresh water that enters the bay. So not only are we getting more pollution to the south, we're also getting less fresh water because of this diversion strategy. And so that's where we come in, and we're trying to establish ways that we can reduce our pollution input into Biscayne Bay because it's such a great and thriving ecosystem, and we want to preserve it that way. So what is Miami Waterkeeper doing? I'm going to share our mission. It's to ensure swimmable, drinkable, and fishable water for all in South Florida. And that language might seem a little bit familiar to some of you, but that language was taken directly out of the EPA's Clean Water Act that was passed in 1972, which essentially gave citizens the right to defend their waterways in court. Before that, you could not defend a body or a river or a bay in court without this monumental act that was passed. And so our mission is to make sure that no matter what, if you swim in the water, if you fish in the water or anything like that, but all of us have to drink fresh water. And so Miami Waterkeeper is here to ensure that that is safe and safeguarded for all. And so what's unique about our approach at Miami Waterkeeper is that we do community outreach and education, science-based research, and legal advocacy. We're one of the very few environmental organizations in the entire state that tackles water issues from all three angles. And we're very busy at every single sector. And this program is actually falling under our community outreach and education, and kind of almost all of our different aspects of our job kind of falls into this program with science-based research and advocacy, which I'll share with you a little bit later, how your participation in this program as an active citizen actually feeds into almost every single part of what we do at Miami Waterkeeper. So this program, like I said earlier, is our signature community program. It's volunteer-based and it's citizen-led. That's all of you. We need your eyes on the water. As we've seen with this fish kill back in August, Miami Waterkeeper was actually first notified with the fish kill because of a citizen that reported the first sightings of dead fish near Morningside Park. And so without that first report, we would have actually never known when the fish kill happened. And it's really integral that we know when things happen, what pollution issues are happening in that area, and how we can continue to track it. And so you all are part of that solution now, and you all are part of that monitoring program. And so who are the 1,000 Eyes on the Water members? That is you. And I want to welcome all of you because this is actually one of my first presentations in Miami Shores. And by being one of the most hard-hit areas in the fish kill, I think it's very valuable for you all to be educated and trained on what to look for in the bay, not just for dead fish, but also the pollution issues that may have led up to that fish kill that you maybe have a stake in and that you can help prevent. And I want to let you all know that just because you don't have a boat doesn't mean that you can't be on the water or near the water and looking out for the water. And so that means by foot, by bike, find any way, rent a kayak or just walk around. Maybe you live on the water. Definitely keep your eyes peeled, and we'll get into that a little bit later. And so now we'll be moving into Biscayne Bay habitats. So Biscayne Bay has 3 habitats that I want to bring to your attention. That is the coral reef tract that is just off shore down here in South Florida. We also have seagrasses, which is more of the intertidal, intercoastal zone. And then we have the mangroves that are, there's a lot more down in the south near Matheson Hammock Park, and there's some mangroves still lingering here and there in different patches across Miami-Dade County. But these 3 ecosystems are extremely important for a thriving fishery and a thriving ecosystem. And so we can prevent all these different ecosystem collapses by preserving these different habitats. And so I'm going to first talk about some coral reefs and why they're important here and why we all should kind of know a little bit more about it. So Florida has the only barrier reef in the continental United States. That is extremely important because when we think about corals, we think that, you know, there might be a lot, it's very tropical, but the only place in the United States besides Hawaii that you can see them is here in Florida. And it supports millions of dollars of businesses and socioeconomic growth. And so we really need to preserve our Florida reef tract as much as we can. It starts all the way up near Boca Raton and extends all the way in past Key West. So it's a substantive coral reef tract we have to protect. But there's 2 things that are threatening it, and it's Port Everglades and Port Miami, these shipping channels that are trying to keep up with the expansion of different shipping canals all across the world and are trying to either dig deeper or widen their channels. And so what this means for corals is essentially that they're not facing a pollution threat like dirty water, they're facing sedimentation. And I'm going to dive into some different ecosystem services that coral reefs have. So we all may know this, but coral reefs provide habitat for so many different fish. They provide the biodiversity of coastal fisheries and coastal resources, and it protects the coastline and protects us from storm surges because coral reefs are essentially the first defense we have against large waves. And so we want to make sure that they're healthy and that they're strong and they're able to be resilient when we have some of these bigger storms coming in the future. And some of the threats that they're facing is physical damage of people going and removing it or hitting it or, you know, bumping it with a boat. We also have climate change that's causing different kinds of ocean acidification and also some coral bleaching episodes. But one of the biggest problems here is sediment burial. And I'll talk a little bit about that, but when we're talking about sediment, it's one of the largest problems here in South Florida. Other things to look for is obviously the bleached white color of corals, and I'll show you some examples of that sedimentation that I'm talking about. So I'll play a little video here. Usually water is supposed to be crystal clear. We're really famous here in South Florida for our blue waters. But as you can see in this video, you can hardly even see 5 feet in front of you. And this is actually at the site of the Port Miami dredging that occurred between 2013 and 2015. Essentially, they went out there and they tried to dredge a new channel and make it deeper. And in doing so, they stirred up all of this sediment, and the sediment covered this area that is almost 2 football fields wide, and it completely smothered coral. It buried them, and corals are dependent on sunlight, and they're dependent on able to feed. And so they were buried, and they almost killed 10,000 corals in doing so. And so sedimentation, it may not seem like a big problem, but it really is, and it can cause harm not just to corals, but to seagrasses and mangroves as well. And so speaking of that, seagrasses. So another important ecosystem here in Biscayne Bay, if not the most important. It is my favorite ecosystem here in South Florida, mainly because it doesn't get enough credit for how much it supports. So not only does seagrass provide food and shelter for various animals, but it provides that base of the food chain. It provides homes to all of the little worms and the snails and all the little things that basically support the top of the food chain. And it also helps stabilize soil. And a lot of people don't realize that seagrass actually cleans the water, it traps sediment, and it helps keep our waters blue and clear. And some of the threats that's happening to our seagrasses, however, are die-off from pollution, damage from boats that you can see in the picture to the right, and also severe algae blooms. Essentially, Biscayne Bay used to be a seagrass dominated habitat. There used to be so much seagrass here. And so if you look at the satellite image that we took in 2011, all of those dark areas is actually where the seagrass beds are and just north of the Julia Tuttle Causeway. However, because of nutrient pollution, we're seeing a regime shift. There's so many nutrients in the water. There's so much pollution that's entering from all these different canals and the little river that essentially we've seen a regime shift. We're now moving into an algae dominated system. And so without seagrass, we're not getting enough oxygen produced in the water. And if we keep losing that amount of seagrass in some places, as you can see in these two maps, we've lost 80 to 90% of seagrass in some areas. And so no longer do we have the oxygen producing seagrass. We're going into the algae dominated ecosystem, which really consumes a lot of the oxygen and makes it really hard for some fish species to survive. And our third habitat I want to talk about tonight is mangroves. So we all love mangroves. It's the most direct ecosystem that we can have a relationship with because we can actually go out and see them pretty much anywhere. They actually provide nursery habitat for a lot of fish that begin their life in nearshore waters, whether that's seagrass or mangroves, and then they eventually make their way out to the coral reefs and then the open ocean. So without the mangroves, we really don't have a protected area where juvenile fish can seek refuge from other bigger fish and predators. Mangroves also provide erosion protection and storm protection. So they're our first defense when we have big storms and waves coming in. And if only we had more mangroves and living shorelines to protect us, we wouldn't see as much flooding. We wouldn't see as much devastation in our coastal areas. And some threats that are happening to mangroves, and not just them getting removed previously, but they're still being illegally removed. And construction areas are still removing them. So something to look out for as a patrol member in Miami Waterkeeper's 1000 Eyes program is trimming and cutting without a permit. So if you see your neighbors or someone in your neighborhood trimming mangroves, they actually need a special permit for that. And more times than not, they're doing it illegally. I do not recommend you go and like confront your neighbor or confront someone that you see doing it, but definitely report it to us and we'll take care of it. Because sometimes they do have a permit to be removing mangroves or trimming them, but we would just want to ensure that they're following the proper protocol. And I just want to go over some marine animals that we have. They use this bay for food and protection. They use this bay for nursery grounds. As you can see, our manatees and our green sea turtles, they're super important, and they actually have seagrass named after them. Some of the two most dominant seagrass species in the bay are manatee grass and turtle grass, which are essentially named after the animals that eat and feed on them. And so there's a lot of threats that are happening to our marine animals, whether that's entanglement from marine pollution or poaching or harassment, which we see all the time. And we want you to keep your eyes out for that. And if you see any injured or struggling animals at the surface or any dead animals, please report it immediately to us and FWC, the Fish and Wildlife Commission. That way we're able to rapidly respond to that and hopefully ensure that everything goes okay for those animals. And a special slide here is dedicated to the small-tooth sawfish. If you've been lucky enough to see one of these animals or even fish for them, they're extremely rare. They're highly endangered here in South Florida. And if you ever see one in the shallows, I highly recommend you report it to us immediately, because there are researchers trying to figure out actually where they breed and where they essentially post up and live and thrive. And the more we know about this animal, the more that we can actually gain protections for them federally. And that will really help out Biscayne Bay in a different way. So if you see one of these animals, you can tell by its rostrum that kind of looks like a chainsaw. And they actually get extremely large. They can get up to 5 to 6 feet. So definitely keep on the lookout. If you're lucky enough to see one, definitely report it to us. And so now I want to get into the meat of this presentation, which I think is why a lot of you are here, which is talking about water pollution and what exactly is happening in Biscayne Bay, especially related to the recent fish kill in August. So water pollution, and when I talk about this, it's essentially anything that's entering the waterway that should not be there. So that includes nutrient pollution, which I will be talking probably the most about today because it is actually one of the #1 pollution issues in Biscayne Bay that Miami Waterkeeper focuses on. But there's also sedimentation. We also have oil and fuel pollution. I know oil and fuel pollution is a big issue on the more western side of Florida, but we still see it here in Miami-Dade County and Broward County, especially in our canal systems where there's so many different marinas. So definitely keep your eyes out for that. And then I'm going to be talking about detergents a little bit, and then other toxic chemicals that maybe you can't really smell or you can't really see. And sometimes it's really hard to track that. And so when we're thinking about water pollution, I just want to kind of introduce two terms to all of you. There is point source pollution and non-point source pollution. So it's essentially exactly how they sound. Point source is we know exactly where it's coming from. You can point exactly to where the pollution is coming from, whether that is a pipe, whether that is a factory, whether that is a specific boat that is leaking oil. We know where it is and we can stop it a lot faster. But what Miami Waterkeeper is trying to get on top of is this non-point source pollution, which essentially is those pollution issues that we don't really know the source. So for example, fertilizers, septic tanks, we can't really pinpoint specifically where that fertilizer is coming from, what lawns, what septic tank is failing, sewage leaks, things like that. Sometimes that is a non-point source pollution issue, and we're trying to pass legislation and we're trying to get ahead of the game and try to stop that and reduce it. And so when we're talking about nutrient pollution, I want you to think about essentially when we think nutrient, it sounds like a very good thing. And by all means, every ecosystem needs nutrients like nitrogen and phosphorus. But if I told you, like, yeah, oranges are healthy for humans to eat. But if I told you to go home and eat 1,000 oranges, the odds are you're going to get super sick. And that's exactly what is happening with Biscayne Bay right now. We're putting way too much nitrogen and way too much phosphorus into our ecosystem, and it's basically causing algae blooms and causing hypoxic environments, which means that there's lack of oxygen. And what that means is that it leads to fish kills. It leads to algae blooms dominating over seagrass and essentially eliminating light that is able to impact our benthic ecosystems, which is all the ecosystems that live on the bottom. If we have this water that's green and absorbing all of the sunlight, all of the organisms and plants that need that to survive in the bay don't get that sunlight. And also human health impacts. A lot of people don't understand that algae, we don't really know some of the effects of it. And cyanobacteria, we really know that can be toxic to humans and pets. So we all have a stake in keeping the bay clean. We all have a stake in reducing our nutrient loading into the bay. And so I want to go over a couple different nutrient sources with you all today about nutrient pollution. The first one is fertilizer, which is a huge one right now because we have so many different fertilizer ordinances going on across Miami-Dade County, actually in the county level and at the individual municipal level. And so what this means is that we don't want people to completely stop using fertilizer, but we want them to be responsible when doing so. And that means not applying fertilizer in the rainy season or when you know it's going to rain. So what that means is not applying fertilizer between June and September when it's our rainiest months. And it's because when we put fertilizer on our lawns when it rains, there's not enough time for the actual grass to absorb the fertilizer before it gets washed away with the rain into a storm drain, into a canal, and then into the bay. So essentially, you're wasting money by fertilizing your lawn during those months, and you're harming the bay a little bit more than you would if you fertilized in the drier months. We also are advocating for people to use slow release nitrogen in your fertilizers, and absolutely, if you can, do not use phosphorus. Use phosphorus-free fertilizer because our system here in South Florida, especially in Miami-Dade and Broward County, our ecosystems are already phosphorus rich. We don't need any more phosphorus entering our waterways. And so to give you a little bit of a recap of what I just said in a really fun way and engaging way, I want to showcase to you the journey of Mr. Fertilizer, which is a really cool animation that we created that hopefully explains a little bit more kind of what we're advocating for across Miami and what you all can do if you own a home and you have a landscape property.
Mr. Fertilizer is full of nutrients like nitrogen and phosphorus, which is applied to our lawns and yards to help plants grow. However, during the summer months, we get lots of rain, which makes it hard for our plants to absorb Mr. Fertilizer. Instead, Mr. Fertilizer and his nutrients get washed away by stormwater into our storm drains and eventually outfalls that lead to canals, the bay, and to the ocean. In these water bodies, there are tiny plants called algae that love Mr. Fertilizer's nutrients, just like our lawns and plants do. So much so that the algae consume all his nutrients and grow and grow and grow. This can create what we call an algae bloom. Algae blooms are a problem because they clog our waterways, turn the water green, smell bad, can kill fish and wildlife, and can be harmful to people. You can do your part to prevent these blooms by using less fertilizer, not applying it anywhere near drains or waterways, and using it only when we know it isn't going to rain. In fact, you can skip the fertilizer completely during the rainy summer months.
So yeah, that's a cute little animation that we created for people to use and kind of remember what to do and what not to do with fertilizer. Because we might think that some of these household chores or household actions like fertilizing or other kinds of chemicals we're using on our lawn, if you're like, well, I'm just one person, it's not going to cause that much of an issue. But if you take 1 million people, which is just a fraction of what we have here in Miami-Dade County and Broward County, with those 1 million people each put 1 gallon of fertilizer on their lawn during the summer months of when it's extremely rainy, millions of gallons of fertilizer could end up being in our waterways by the end of the year. And that really causes some problems. And so it's really not the individual, but it's the collective grouping of how much fertilizer lawn owners and homeowners are using that could really be harming the bay. So it's really different kind of approach because we think that fertilizers are good for our properties, good for our landscape. But at the end of the day, if we're not responsible about how we're using it, those excess nutrients can really build up in the waters, cause algae blooms, and lead to fish kills. And to be completely honest, we have this presentation for years now, and we've always talked about fish kills, and they don't really happen that often here in Miami. And the fact that we had a very severe ecosystem collapse back in early August, leading to a fish kill and then a subsequent algae bloom is just really, it's a sad example of what we've been talking about for so long. And I hope that we can all start making some changes to the way that we're living and utilizing some of our landscape and green spaces for the sake of our blue spaces here in Miami-Dade and Broward County. So another nutrient source I want to talk about briefly is animal waste, just to remind everyone to pick up after pets. This may seem like something that doesn't really have an impact on our bay or can't have a really large impact, but we have had some studies in the past and people saying that when they do source tracking, which is essentially when we test our waters in Miami, Miami Waterkeeper goes out and tests for FIB, which is fecal indicator bacteria, which essentially is bacteria that originates with anything that's, coming out of human waste or any kind of animal waste. And when you do source tracking, you can kind of find out what waste it is. Is it, dog waste? Is it human waste? Is it from a sewage leak? What's happening? And more times than not, majority of that bacteria is it's pointing its finger towards pets, specifically dogs, and also birds. So if we can do our part to reduce our animal waste that is building up in our bay, we can also help out with some beach closures and reduce bacteria levels. And another one I want to talk about, since we're talking about that waste issue, it's not very glamorous. It's a running joke when I talk to family members about that, oh, I'm a marine scientist, and they think, oh, you must work with a lot of fish and sharks. And the sad fact is I talk about sewage and a lot of the nasty things that we don't want to talk about, and that's my daily life. But it is a really big issue, and I'm glad that Miami Waterkeeper and I are really trying to push this forward to make sure that people are aware of what's going on. And so another big one for nutrient pollution is sewage and septic leaks. This is a huge sewage leak that happened off the shore of Virginia Key, near the Virginia Key wastewater sewage plant. Essentially, this was seen by an underwater diver and reported to us, and we were able to get that fixed. And this right here is essentially a leak that happened right in Oleta underneath one of the bridges. It was spotted by a group of kayakers, and they said, well, there's this huge bubbling that's coming up under the bridge, and they didn't know what it was, and it smelled a little weird, and it was millions of gallons of raw sewage that had bursted underneath a bridge and essentially leaked into there, and it was a really big mess to clean up. But these are some of the things to keep your eyes out for. If you see something, if you smell something, it seems a little off, it probably is. And those are the types of things that you want to report to Miami Waterkeeper right away, because time is pollution. And we could be saving millions of gallons of raw sewage that is impacting our waterways. We do not need those nutrients. And so I want to talk about something else here we're starting to really pick up the pace on is septic tanks here in Miami-Dade County. So here's a diagram that shows what a functioning septic tank is supposed to be like. And essentially, if you're on a septic tank, you'll know that it's like your own little waste facility that like is either underneath your house or very close to your house. And it basically processes all of your human waste. It goes into a drain field, and essentially it percolates down and filters into the ground. It gets purified through all of the soil, and then all of that water gets put back into the groundwater, and we're able to reuse it. However, because of climate change, our seas are rising. Our water table is rising. And in some places in Miami, the water table is now only a few feet right below the surface of what we know as the ground. And in order for a septic tank to work properly, it needs at least 1 to 2 feet of dry soil between the tank itself and the water table. And what we know is that there's over 60,000 septic tanks in Miami that are already compromised. Essentially, that they don't have enough dry soil between the septic tank and the water table to really filter out all of the different nutrients. So what that means is that these failed and compromised septic tanks with sea level rise are now leaching all of this waste that is not getting treated back into the environment, and it's polluting groundwater, and it has the ability to pollute our well water, and also leach into canals and then into the bay. And so we're trying to do a lot of campaigns around septic right now. That means that if you are on septic, you're trying to work with the government to try to get you off of it and hooked onto a sewage line. And essentially that will eliminate that central process and bring it to a different facility where they can actually handle treating that water and getting it back to a reuse form. And so that's kind of the 3 nutrient sources that I kind of wanted to talk to you all today. That's a really big problem here in Miami-Dade County. So fertilizer is something, if you do own a lawn, if you know someone who owns a lawn, you can immediately tell them how they can help save the bay. Animal waste, if you have an animal, definitely pick up after them and make sure that you're properly disposing it, their waste wherever you can, and keep an eye out for sewage pollution, and very much keep up to date on septic leaks, and try to advocate in commission meetings, whether that's municipal or county, to do something about the septic pollution issue that we have here in South Florida. Because we're so close to sea level, we're so porous here with our limestone geology that essentially septic tanks may work in many other areas of Florida or other states in the country, but here in South Florida, they're just not the best solution for how we manage our waste. I wanted to talk a little bit more about sediment. So as we know, it smothers corals and seagrass. It may choke out fish and contain chemicals. What to look for when you're out on the water. If you see milky or light colored plumes that you're like, what is this coming from? It usually happens during a heavy rainfall, but it's probably originating from a dredging site or a construction site. And that's something to note to us because we've actually just passed we just passed an ordinance and a regulation in the city of Miami that essentially increases the fine for construction sites that aren't following the rules of reducing their sedimentation. They are not supposed to be having all of this dirt and mud and chemicals leaching from their properties. They're supposed to be having protocols to prevent that. And so we just won a very big battle and increased their fines. And so that hopefully will keep them in check, and hopefully keep moving forward with reducing the sedimentation happening in Biscayne Bay. This is just a short video of kind of what happened. So this is a picture of Port Miami dredging that occurred back in 2013 to 2015. As you can see in the water, all of that milky siltation that kind of can travel a pretty far ways and eventually will blanket whatever ecosystem is positioned underneath it. And we want to prevent that from happening. Another big thing to look out for is oil and fuel contaminants. So that obviously threatens wildlife, but also threatens the health of ecosystems and ourselves. So look for that rainbow sheen, the classic rainbow sheen that happens all the time with oil or gasoline. Report it if it's a very large oil leak. And it's very commonly seen in marinas or especially closer to storm drains that may be draining off of roads. Those are different pollution issues that we want to get on top of and make sure that we can get out there early so it doesn't really expand and get to a point where we can't really control it. Another thing I want you all to look out for is detergent. So as our Water Patrol members, you may not know, but the soapy detergents that we use, if they're not environmentally safe, that can actually harm like the oil lining of fish, the oil sheen that's protecting their scales. It can harm different aspects of ecosystems and affect water chemistry. So we really don't want to reduce that. And if we can, use soap that is ecosystem friendly. And if you see anyone washing their boat or a car wash that is basically letting all of the soap they're using to wash your car go right into one of the storm drains on the street, That's actually illegal, and we don't want that to happen. We want to reduce that. And a good thing to do in this situation, if you do see a neighbor who's washing a car, or yourself who's washing a car, you may think, oh, well, I'm going to park on the street, or I'm going to park on my driveway so that all the water can kind of filter out into a drain. The safer thing to do is actually wash your car on your lawn. If you can find a grassy area, the vegetation can handle detergent. It can filter out all of the different pollutants, and it can actually, it's better for the environment for you to do it over your lawn than it is to drain it right into the street and into a storm drain. And the last one I want to talk about here is toxic chemicals. So these are the things that you might not be able to see. You can't oftentimes smell it, but you might be able to. So definitely keep your eyes and ears and nose, everything like that, out for different kinds of toxic pollutants. So for example, in the middle picture here, you can see a dumpster. Dumpsters aren't supposed to be leaking. They're actually supposed to be containing most of their materials and all of the stuff that is getting thrown into them. And as you can see in this photo, this dumpster had been leaking for a very long amount of time, and not even during rainfall. And if you see down to the bottom right of that photo, there is a storm drain right there, and a canal is only about 10 yards away from that dumpster. So whatever's getting thrown in there from that factory behind it is going directly into the waterways. And that was a pollution case that was reported to us, and that we were able to resolve as well. Where to look? Obviously dumpsters, storm drains, parking lots. Honestly, anywhere toxic chemicals can pop up in the most unlikely of places, and we really want to get a handle on it, especially if you can smell it. Ammonia smells are really important, because ammonia in our environment really leads to anoxic or hypoxic environments that leads to no oxygen. And so I've been talking a lot. I'm sorry for that, but I just want to kind of recap in a small little graphic about all the pollution issues that are plaguing the Bay that I want you to keep a look out for. And so that is all these different storm drain outfalls that are happening, that are running off from our streets and other land-based sources of pollution. I also want you to look out. You can't really look out for our sewage infrastructure, essentially, that's crumbling underneath our feet. But you can look out for sewage breaks and pipe leaks and things like that I want you to kind of keep your eyes out for. Miami-Dade County is built on an aging infrastructure of sewage pipes that was built in the 40s, 50s, and 60s, back when I told you, like, the population was only a fraction of what it is now. And some of those pipes are still the original pipes. And so they were never built to sustain the millions of people that live here. And essentially, the government right now has mandates where they will not replace they will not replace the pipes unless they break, which it seems really counterintuitive, but essentially is what we're dealing with now. And so we have a lot of different campaigns right now called Invest in Our Water, where we're getting our government agencies able to secure more funding and invest in our infrastructure a little bit better, so we can prevent some of these other catastrophes related to sewage leaks. We talked about septic tanks a little bit. We also talked about all different kinds of land-based sources of pollution, like the detergent, the oil, fertilizer, anything like that essentially leads into the water and can cause algae blooms, which eventually will smother our seagrass and really impact our ecosystems and cause fish kills. Essentially, that's kind of a little overview of what's going on in South Florida beyond the plastic pollution that we always see on TV and other environmental organizations, and some things that you can get involved in and try to help reduce and keep an eye out for. And so why are these problems in Biscayne Bay watershed? So essentially, NOAA, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Association, chose Biscayne Bay as one of the 10 locations around the country that says we need to put so much federal funding here because this is a very economically important ecosystem. It supports so many industries for this geographic area, but it's also a tipping point. It's at a regime shift. We're almost to a point where Biscayne Bay, that we've seen with the most recent fish kill, where the bay can't take any more nutrients. It can't take any more pollution. And we're seeing the impacts of that and the effects. And so we really need to reduce the land-based sources of pollution that we're seeing entering our waterways. And we need to do it quicker rather than later because of how urgent we saw back in August with the fish kill, and the gravity of the situation has definitely changed in the recent months. And so I wanted to talk to you all today before we end about the fish kill that happened in Biscayne Bay. I'm sure you all wanted to join today to learn a little bit more about exactly what happened and kind of what we know now about, what led up to the fish kill. So if you look in the map on the left, there's a black square, And essentially that black square showcases an area where we're seeing these really high levels of chlorophyll. And essentially chlorophyll is the green, and like it's a cell essentially that shows, it measures the amount of algae that's in the water. And we're seeing huge spikes of algae in this area near Matheson Hammock Park and the Cutler Bay area. And what we know about that area is that they have immense amounts of landscaping and lawns. And so we're leading to believe that the Coral Gables Waterway and Snapper Creek Canal are really getting polluted with not just fertilizer, which is an obvious culprit, but also stormwater runoff and septic tanks, because South Miami, is really built with majority of septic tanks. So we're trying to understand how to reduce that and kind of decrease the amount of chlorophyll and algae that we're seeing in the water. And coming up to a little bit closer to home for all of you in Miami Shores, the second black square here that's moved up to the top of that map, this is the North Biscayne Bay. This is where majority of our canals lead. One of the most polluted rivers in South Florida is the Little River. And that's up in Biscayne Bay. And so we're seeing excessive dredging, we're seeing excessive construction areas, and we're seeing a lot of fertilizer and other runoff pollution issues entering this Biscayne area. And it's really hard because this intercoastal zone doesn't really have a lot of circulation like the southern part of our county does with the open ocean and the more open, wide area. And so what that means is that whatever gets put in there, it takes a lot more time to get filtered out or kind of swept out to sea. And that kind of leads to pollution buildup that we're starting to see with this chlorophyll A analysis. And so what our ecosystem is supposed to be in the North Biscayne Bay area, which is near Miami Shores, it's near North Bay Village, it's up near Oleta, it's supposed to be a thriving nursery for fish with mangroves and seagrass. And this is what it's supposed to look like, this photo. But starting on August 10th and near Morningside, this is what happened. This is what our ecosystem now looks like. And it wasn't just a few fish that died here and there. It was an extensive fish kill that started in Morningside but spread as far north as Oleta. And we actually had fish washing up dead near Virginia Key. It is a huge geographic region and thousands of fish died. We also saw over 47 species of fish impacted. So usually it's when we see fish kills, fish that live at the bottom of the ocean and the fish that are more slow are the ones that usually die. And a lot of the larger prey and larger fish do not, or they're able to swim away. They're able to get away from everything. But what we saw with this fish kill, which makes us really alarmed, and it's a very serious issue, is that we saw all different kinds of fish. We saw stingrays, we saw octopus, predators, and large fish that should be able to swim away from poor water quality and algae blooms and low oxygen level environments, but they weren't able to escape because of how large this tipping point was and this pollution issue was. And so after the fish kill, everyone was like, well, what's happening? We can't see anything in the water. It's not an algae bloom because we can't see that. We don't see any green algae. So we really didn't know what it was, but Miami Waterkeeper was like, let's just watch and see what happens. And sure enough, about 6 days into the fish kill, when all the fish were coming up dead, we realized there's a lot of low oxygen levels in the bay. What happened? We started seeing these immense amount of algae blooms happening in the canals. You can see that water bottle essentially was thrown on top of the algae, and it was so thick, it was as if it's a solid surface. And so this is what is called a positive feedback loop, when all of a sudden we have, all these nutrients, all the fish dying, we have nutrients coming from the dead fish, and we get to a cyclical environment, and now it's really hard to get rid of the algae bloom, and it's really hard to get our Biscayne Bay back on track. And I want to be very clear that when people talk about fish kills, they do happen, and they do happen regularly, but this fish kill in Biscayne Bay was not normal and is unprecedented. It has never happened at this size, of this gravity, and of this kind of way, essentially. So why did this happen? You may have seen reports on the news or from different media outlets that essentially the fish died because of low oxygen levels in the water and because of high temperatures. Don't get me wrong, that is part of the puzzle of why, but essentially these fish experience high temperatures and they experience sometimes low oxygen levels all of the time. And so why all of a sudden did this happen at this level? And actually, when this happened, it was actually not as hot as it was earlier in the summer. So why didn't we see fish kills in June and July? And it's because of pollution. So when we have increased stress, so not just increased temperature, not just low dissolved oxygen levels, but we're putting so many nutrients, there's so much algae being created in the bay that it reduces even that oxygen by even more. And so that's what really led to it. And if we are able to reduce the pollution in Biscayne Bay and reduce our nutrient pollution, hopefully our ecosystems and our fisheries and all of the animals that thrive and survive in that environment are able to rebound a lot quicker and be more resilient to higher temperatures in the future. And so some of these pollution issues that are to blame for the fish kill are compromised septic systems, sewage leaks, stormwater runoff, and fertilizer, because those are the biggest contributors to the nutrients that are being put into the water. More nutrients equals more algae, which equals less oxygen. And then when the temperature increases, even more oxygen is gone. And that really leads to a difficult situation for some of our fish species. So this is just a really good example, a little graphic that I want to show all of you today that I made, showcasing how these four nutrient sources kind of impact. So essentially we're putting fertilizer, septic, stormwater, sewage, all these things into our bay. That increases the algae and the amount of bacteria. Essentially leads to low dissolved oxygen levels and really low dissolved oxygen levels if it's a little bit hotter out. All of a sudden the fish dies and more nutrients and bacteria come from the dead fish. And then it creates an algae bloom, and then essentially it goes around in a circle if we can't get a handle on it, if we can't reduce our nutrient sources. And nutrients come from all over. So this is a little diagram showcasing all the different possibilities of where these nutrients are coming from and all these different pollution sources. And then I wanted to show you a map before we end here, talking about the fish kill reports. So the 1,000 Eyes on the Water program, which is what I'm giving to you right now, is training citizens to have a stake in the conversation and have a responsibility to look out for our waterways. And over a 2-week period at Miami Waterkeeper, I received over 300 reports from individual citizens across Miami-Dade County. We had people from the county level, the state level, and the federal level in different environmental agencies come to us saying, we don't know what's going on. We don't have enough people to go out there and figure out. And they depended on us as citizens, and all these reports of people telling us what they're seeing on the ground, what you're seeing in your canal, what you're seeing in your neighborhood, and what you're seeing when you're on your boat. And it was one of the most influential tools that people used to help save Biscayne Bay, help get it back into essentially a better standing than it was prior to the fish kill. But it's really important that citizens engage with citizen science this way. Just because you're not a scientist and you're not involved environmentally in your professional field doesn't mean you can't protect the bay in your everyday life by just keeping your eyes out for what's going on. And this is what I wanted to show you, that like time is of the essence. And so as you can see, this is a little GIF that essentially showcases where the first fish kill reports were sent to us by citizens. And then as it kind of progressed through the first week of the fish kill, and you can actually see the spread of where it originated. And we kind of were able to pinpoint where this was coming from. And we kind of came to the conclusion that a lot of these nutrients and low oxygen levels were resulting from the Little River and other canal systems that are really high in nutrients. And so it just goes to show that programs like 1,000 Eyes on the Water, by you all becoming part of our patrol team, you're actually really investing a lot of time and needed energy and the attention that Biscayne Bay needs, and having your eyes out there to protect it. And so some of our advocacy recommendations I want to give you is this is what we're kind of going forward with at Miami Waterkeeper when we're talking with local elected officials, is stop sewage leaks, eliminate septic tanks when possible, enacting a fertilizer ordinance in not just every municipality, but across Miami-Dade County, and store and treat stormwater. Those are our 4 advocacy recommendations. And that is essentially our training overview. And so I just want to go over some water patrol guidelines with you all, then I'll take some questions. So I invite you all to now be part of our team. You're a 1,000 Eyes on the Water patrol member. So your role is to observe, document, and report whatever you see on the water. And information is the most powerful tool. We saw this firsthand with the fish kill. By activating the public, activating our 1,000 Eyes on the Water patrol team, who are citizens across Miami-Dade and Broward County, they were able to supply us with such important information that it was being used by the EPA, FDEP, and all other agencies that were trying to help save Biscayne Bay. And Miami Waterkeeper is going to be that source for you. So whatever you see, we don't want you to figure out who to call or who to report it to. Always just send it to us, and then we'll direct it to the appropriate agency and make sure and ensure that the problem is fixed. And so if you see something when you're out in the water, if you're near the water and you're like, oh gosh, that's really bad, where do I send that to? You can always send it to our email at hello@miamiwaterkeeper.org. You can text it to us by phone, or follow us on social media, any Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, anything. Send it to us there. Otherwise, on our website, we are going to have a water patrol button. As soon as you get to our website, there's going to be a big button at the top that says report pollution. You click that, and essentially you're going to be able to fill out a Google form. And that's that. And hopefully you'll be able to, get on top of it sooner rather than later. And this is just a slide that I have to throw in here for everyone, but safety first. Don't attempt to clean up or mitigate any oil spills. Don't, trespass. Don't pick up any hazardous substances, and definitely don't confront anyone if they're the ones that are polluting. Just tell us, and we'll be the ones that are going to be able to handle the situation. And what to report. So a lot of times we get people sending in photos to us at Miami Waterkeeper just showcasing a picture of a tree or a picture of a pollution issue, but they don't tell us where they are. So if you have an address, that's great. A GPS coordinate, drop a pin on your phone or any kind of landmarks just so we know where you are. And other pertinent details like pollution type. How big is it? Habitat destruction, and other things like photos and videos are super important as well. And I guess all I want to do next is tell all of you to sign. If you are intrigued and you want to be part of our team and you want to get any kind of text blast that tell you when that you need to be activated, when you should be looking out for things, sign up for our 1000 Eyes Rapid Response Team and get involved. So I will copy and paste that link into the chat, and you can kind of take that and sign up online, sign up for our newsletter, and essentially go on water patrol. And you can patrol by any means necessary as long as that you're able to get near the water. And so thank you to everyone at the City of Miami Shores for putting on this great presentation and inviting me here today, and to all of our partners that helped make this possible. Essentially, it's 500 people, 1,000 eyes, one mission at Miami Waterkeeper to protect Biscayne Bay. And I do want to tell you that we actually have exceeded our goal of 500 people for the program. So that's really awesome. In the last couple months, we've really increased our numbers and increased our eyes. And maybe I have to name it 10,000 eyes now. We'll see. But it's really good news coming from Miami Waterkeeper. So I would love to take any questions now. If you have any, I am going to also drop in the chat the 1000 Eyes Rapid Response Team. If you want to join, if you want to, all you have to do is sign up, and we'll be able to send you emails. Yes, Alice Birch. Yes. Hold on, I think I have to allow you to talk. Sorry about that. All right, Alice, go ahead and unmute yourself.
Thank you. Thank you so much for this very informative presentation, Colin. You've done a great job here, very comprehensive, and thanks for filling in all of the new information that we learned from the fish kill. I think my question has got to be, does Miami Waterkeeper do some advocacy in septic to sewer conversions? And if so, what would that look like? As you know, they're very expensive. So yeah. We're wondering,
yes,
we have that issue. So
of course, thank you for your question, Alice. And that's a huge question, because when we're talking about septic and sewer conversion, we use examples like Florida Keys, for example. They converted all of their properties off of septic and onto sewer a while ago. And they didn't put the burden of having citizens actually having to invest, because that could cost thousands, if not $10,000s of dollars to get your septic tank, basically get off of septic tank onto a sewage line. And what Miami Waterkeeper is advocating for is not for people to bear that cost, but for the federal government and our municipal governments and county governments to invest in different grant programs that do exist and other counties and municipalities have utilized to get their citizens off of septic. And so Miami Waterkeeper's program and campaign called Invest in Our Water, we're starting to do a lot of septic tank advocacy and outreach with elected officials, trying to secure funding and starting in some of our most compromised areas. So that's a lot of the flood prone and a lot of those really low-lying areas that have septic tanks that are most likely already compromised or if not failing. And so that's kind of our advocacy that we're doing right now. We're actually about to launch a huge web page and campaign on our website for specifically septic to sewer conversion. And that actually should be live by the end of November. So I hope you all can follow us. And once that's aired, you'll be able to see draft legislation. You'll be able to see all of these different videos and different kinds of materials that maybe will help you guide the situation a little bit better. And every municipality is different of how they might address it. And so there's a lot coming out with that. I wish I had the website live right now, but it is coming out in the end of November. We'll have a page for it on our website. And we're going to be start doing that in 2021.
Great. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Yes, of course. Any other questions? Just raise your hand or drop it in the Q&A box that you see at the bottom or top of your screen. All right, well, if there's no other questions, I think I will wrap this up. It's 8 o'clock right now, so I won't keep you on your Thursday night. But I do want to thank all of you who participated today. Really, it was awesome meeting some of you. And thank you again for the City of Miami Shores for putting this on. And if you all, before you leave, or if you're watching this as a recorded version, definitely look into signing up for our 1000 Eyes Rapid Response Team with the link in the chat, or going to our website, miamiwaterkeeper.org, and searching 1000 Eyes. I really would love all of your eyes on the water. It's more valuable than you think. So thank you for having me, and I hope to see you all in the water soon.
Bye.